walked the journey of recovery together for over 30 years, and I cannot think of a better person to carry the message to us today than John Y. Brown III. Yeah.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you, Steve, so much. It's wow, a lot of people here. It's a great honor to see so many friends today, and people from my past. Andy Bleeden is also a board member and was one of my dearest friends in high school and ever since. I shared with Steve this story. I was bused to Central my junior and senior years, and I saw Andy on a holding court in the courtyard area, and everybody was laughing, and I was like, who is this guy? I want to get to know him. And we became friends, and ended up going on spring break together. And I drove, went to Fort Lauderdale, and one night we went to a bar on the Strip, Sunrise Strip, and Andy had Mark's, his older brother's ID, and got in, and I had a fake ID that they spotted and wouldn't let me in. So Andy said, just wait here for me, and I'll be out in a little bit. And so I stood off to the side and just peered in, and I could kind of see through the corner of this door. Andy was dancing and having fun and drinking and talking to the women. And he came out and he said, they're having a dance contest. Just give me a minute. It's like, you don't even dance. And I could see him dancing, and then he turned around and then did the splits and ripped his pants, and he won the dance contest. Yeah. And then I took him home afterwards, and it was either later that night or it may have been the next night, and we were having a heart-to-heart, and I was like, why can't I be more like you? You have such an ease with people and situations, and he said, well, you drink a lot and you get high a lot, and sometimes, you'll say something funny and it'll work, but sometimes if you're just kind of loaded, you'll say something like, I don't know, spaghetti and meatballs, and not literally meaning, but something that just doesn't make sense. And he said, and I remember that, but my takeaway wasn't that I should drink less, but avoid talking about pasta, I think. And so it was 5 years later before I made it to rehab. And Andy introduced me to my wife. I was a year and a half sober, and we had dinner, and he said, who you dating? I said, nobody. He said, when's the last time you had a date? And I said, well, let's see, it was a Thursday, Wednesday, about 9 months. And he said, well, I can help you fix that. And so we were at a party about a week later, and he goes up to my wife, Rebecca, and said, do you have a boyfriend? And she's like, no, not presently. And he said, do you want one? And she said, I don't know. He said, wait right here. And that was, what was it, 38 years ago or something. So thank you, Andy. Yes, thank you. Yeah. So, yeah. It's in. Give enough money, I will. It's in it. It's in him still. So I did not go to the Morton Center, but I qualify, I suppose, because our family's been in therapy with John Walsh for about 15 years now, and John helped sort of found the Morton Center, and John has progressed very well during those 15 years, and I like to think our family has too, and we're grateful for you, John. You've been a godsend to us, and because of our relationship with you, we have such admiration for the Morton Center and all the great work that's done here. And so thank you very much. And I would like to get, so, you know, in AA, we, and by the way, I love that. I keep looking at this painting, and one of the best descriptions of recovery I've ever heard is one beggar telling another beggar where to find the bread. And I love those two chairs, one alcoholic talking to another, and the genius of that, and the magic of that. So we tell our stories, what happened, or you know, what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. So I guess we'll get to that. I was with my mom last night, and told her I was supposed to talk for 30 minutes, and showed her the list of the people attending, and she said, you know, you don't have to tell them everything. That's a very nice group of people. And, and in fact, you don't have to talk the whole 30 minutes. People like to get back to work after lunch. And I said, you're going to come out well, Mom. And I was born and raised here in Louisville, and I think a happy kid. I was anxious, you know, I used to chew on my shirt collar, and but I think, a pretty happy kid. You know, as Steve mentioned, we kind of had a big life in some ways. My dad took over Kentucky Fried Chicken, and there was a lot of moving around, and you know, not much stability, continuity. It wasn't uncommon to go to 3 different schools in a year. You know, so I don't know that was particularly healthy, but I love my family, and we had alcoholism on both sides. My grandfather on my mom's side, Muhlenberg County, and my grandmother on my dad's side. And I was aware of it, but I didn't think much of it as long as it didn't interfere too much. We just like most kids, you know, I didn't really take it to heart. And then my parents divorced when I was 13, and my father moved down to Fort Lauderdale and bought a place called Le Club International, which means the International Club, for those of you who don't speak French. I don't want anything particularly French about it. It was just sort of a swanky place for guys about his age who were divorced, and I would spend my summers there. And I looked it up online just as we were driving over, and they described it and said, and it sometimes can be a little naughty, which. But it was, and it attracted some, I guess you might call them seedy people, and I've always had an affinity for seedy people. I just get them, I like them. There's not much pressure around them. They usually think they're gifted in multiple areas and interesting, and I don't know. They're endearing, I guess. And there was a lot of folks like that there. There was a lot of gambling, young women. I mean, it's a 13-year-old's fantasy, basically, you know, being there. And so I saw a lot of things, did a lot of things that probably was too young to have seen and done. But I think in looking back, I was scared. I was scared of trying things and of just being average or maybe even just above average. And so I wouldn't do it. And I would tell myself, this just isn't worthy of my. If I wanted to, I could do it, but I choose not to. I've got better things to do, and that's a tough way to go through life. And I tell my kids, get on the field, go out, and if you're not failing in life, you're not trying hard enough. You know, get scuffed up, and they have, and I love that about them. When I finished high school, my father sat me down. I was graduating the bottom half of my class. He knew about my drinking. He'd had a friend try to 12-step me. And I remember him saying at one point, if we got out had a blackboard and wrote down the ways you could screw up your life, I don't think you're leaving anything out, you know? And so he had sold Encyclopedia Britannica door to door as a young man and had been a top salesman regionally and got a lot of acclaim for it. And he said, why don't you do this? Why don't you get a door-to-door sales job? And there's this company in Tennessee. They hire college students, and this will be good for you. It's going to build character. It's going to teach you how to sell yourself and your ideas. And I said, okay, we'll try this. And they sent me to Pikeville, Kentucky. And I really didn't care for the job. It was 75 hours a week and I have sold Bibles and medical books, children's books, and a family Bible door to door up in the hollers of Pikeville. And my first customer, by the way, was Judy Patton, who was Paul Patton's wife. And it was my third day. And then every week we would have our sales meetings, and they would publish how everyone did. And there was, several thousand salespeople nationwide. And those sales reports would come out, and I would be in the middle, and I just couldn't take that. So about the third week, I came up with this idea that, what if I got a loan and bought a lot of the books, put them down as sales, and in the fall, after the summer ends, I could sell them on my own back home. Nobody'd be the wiser, and let's give this a try. So I went to Pikeville National Bank. I got a loan for $2,800, and the next week I was the #1 first-year salesperson in the nation. And it was great. We had our Sunday sales meeting in Blackberry, Virginia. The other salespeople hoisted me on their shoulders and carried me around the room and asked me to give a talk on my sales technique. And I was happy to do it, which is weird, but there was something in me that said, I could do this if I wanted to. I just have found an angle, an easier, softer way, as we say in the program. So I gave a pretty good talk, actually. I took questions, and I was loving it. And my dad would call every night and tell me how proud he was of me and give me sales tips. And I felt like we're finally getting close, and this is wonderful. And my sales manager was at a meeting in Texas and said he had this gem of a guy in Kentucky. And he was not only #1 this week, but he was going to be #1 next week, too. So Pikeville wouldn't loan me any more money for that next week. But I drove into Liberty National, where my mom did her bit, and they somehow gave me $1,800, which was just enough for me to be first in the nation again that next week. And I carried on with my plan. It got harder and harder to loan money, to get but by the end of the summer, I had the highest per week sales average of any first-year salesperson, and I had bought a little over $10,000 worth of Bibles and medical books, and I was storing them at a friend's house in Lexington, and I remember him saying, if you don't mind, would you pretend that you're buying the medical books instead of the Bibles, because they're lighter and easier to store up here. And that's about $35,000 in today's money, so it was a lot. And the company started calling me. They had figured it out, and I went down to the club and went on a big binge and wouldn't answer the phone, and I didn't know what to do. I came home and I fessed up, and fortunately they took back all of the books that I had bought. And the sad part is, when the actual numbers came out, I finished in the top 10% for real sales. But I didn't feel like that was, good enough. I had to be the best. And my boss talked me into coming back a second summer. He told me, you can redeem yourself. And I'd never really thought about the word redeem, but I love the idea. And so the next summer I went down to Tyler, Texas, and I had a team of people, and those sales reports started coming out, and I only bought $7,000 worth of books that summer. I just couldn't resist, and he did not invite me back a third summer. And I was depressed and was drinking even heavier and using, and decided to do a geographic escape and moved out to Los Angeles and enrolled at UCLA, except not really. I did enroll, I just didn't go to class, and then I eventually dropped out, and my parents would call and say, well, how are you doing? I'd say, that's fine. And, well, like how? How are the grades? And I would just say, you know, it's hard to say, but it's probably not going to impact my overall grade point average. And we just leave it at that. And then I transferred to USC, and I was there for a year. I tried to fit in. You know, I went to the beach, and like my first week out there, and there was this product, Sun In, that you put on your hair that makes it blonde. And I really didn't look like an LA guy, not really. But I got some Sun In, and I sprayed a little, and it kind of looked all right. You know, it was going blonde a little bit. And so the next day, I doused. I just poured a whole bottle on my hair, and it turned orange. And so I had orange hair and brown roots, and I remember I was at this party, and these two girls at UCLA were talking to me, and then later on they motioned me over, and I thought, oh, good, I'm fitting in finally. And I came over, and they said, say something. And I was like, well, why? They said, listen to his accent, say something. And it was hard, and I kind of became a loner, and I got to where I wouldn't answer the phone. I just would go to class. VCRs had come out. I would watch movies. I would drink, and I'd pass out. And my mom decided, a friend of the family was going on this program called Semester at Sea, and she signed me up for that. And so you get on a ship, and you go to these different countries, and this was going to snap me out of it. And I got to be friends with this wonderful young guy from Nebraska who was a pothead, and we had that in common. But he was a sweet guy. He was editor of the school newspaper, and I would write articles, and we just did everything together. And we had some great times, and he told his parents about me, his friend from Kentucky, and life was getting a little better. And then he confronted me about my drinking and using, and he said, I just don't like you as much when you're high all the time, and you get real cynical and sarcastic, and it's just not fun. And sensitive guy that I am, like a lot of ex, I just said, well, you know, I didn't talk to him. Yeah. And the next port was in Sri Lanka, and we had traveled in every port together, but we didn't on that one. And when I got back, I'd gotten word that someone had died, and it was my friend Bruce, he had drowned, and his parents, and I wrote his obituary, and his parents contacted me multiple times, and I wouldn't respond because I didn't know what to say to them. And they got hold of my parents and said, please have your son contact us. We just want to talk to him, hear about our son, and I just didn't know what to do. And I eventually came home, and by this time, I had been in college for 8 semesters and attended 7 different colleges and was barely a sophomore. And sort of the jig was up, and my family did an intervention and sent me to rehab up in Minnesota. And I remember right before I went, I was watching Nightline, and it was, they were doing a special on one of the Kennedy children that had OD'd. And they just interviewed all these friends and family talking about what a wonderful young man is. He had so much potential, and it was so tragic. And I remember thinking, I've got myself in such a mess. That's not a bad way out. That was about the best plan I could come up with. And so when treatment was offered up, I just, why not? And I went up to Minnesota, and as one of my first sponsors would say, my life began again. I thought my I'd had a lot of bad breaks and misunderstandings, and that's why I drank and used, but it was the other way around, and it was a disease, and I loved it there. I was elected unit leader. I won by a landslide. It was my first political race. I beat a meth addict from Minnesota and a cocaine addict from Boston, resoundingly. And I love the 44 days there, and I didn't want to leave, really. Something magical happens there, you know, like here. And it touches people. We stop, and we're in a supportive environment, and people just want to help us. They have no other agenda but to help. And I'd never experienced that, really. And I came home, and I was excited about my new life, and I enrolled in Bellarmine, and I didn't get the whole aftercare thing. I thought, I get it. I'm an alcoholic, I don't drink. How hard is that to remember? I don't need to go to meetings every day with all these old people, they smoke, it's, you know, and so I kind of cut back on the meat, and I relapsed, and then I came back, and I don't know what exactly it was. I just remember being at a meeting on a Wednesday night. It was a men's meeting, and I just looked at the guys sitting in front of me, and I said, I don't know what happens here, but they seem to have figured out life. They're getting on with their life, and they're laughing, and they're showing up for work, and they look like they're reasonably happy, and I'll try this a day at a time, you know. And I did, and I got a wonderful man to be my sponsor named Dave Inman. A few of you may remember. He had a nickname Fishman, and he would stutter, and he loved this program, and he would be available for me. And he would say all kinds of corny things like, you know, keep it awfully simple so it doesn't become simply awful. And humility is when your head gets smaller and your heart gets bigger. And it would just, you know, just forgive him. Love's the answer. What's your question? You know, and I love the guy. And I remember sitting with him before I went to law school, and I said, do you think I can be in the top 10% of my class? And he said, oh, I don't know anything about that, but if anybody asks, I can tell them you're a fine young man. And I don't know why that breaks me up, but it does. And maybe it's because there was no agenda. He just wanted me to be a good person and a happy person, and that was so important to me. And he had a friend named Mike C. who would sit next to me at meetings, and he would pat me on the back, because I would sometimes look down or close my eyes just so I could focus and listen. And Mike would pat me on the back and say, you're okay. And that's what I get at every meeting I go to. I get the message that you're okay. There's a pat on the back, and I need that for whatever reason. And Dave encouraged me to go to meetings every day, and I did. And then he died, and no one told me to stop going to meetings every day. So I've been doing this now for 39 years, which means I've been to about 1,400 meetings, and I was one this morning. No, 14,000 meetings. 14,000 meetings. I know it was more than that. And every one, I just feel that pat on the back, you know. And Mike would say, AA was the last place he wanted to go, and the first place he never wanted to leave. And I remember, and Dave would say, AA allowed him to be the person he always wanted to be, but didn't know how. And that's true for me too. And I went to law school. I met Rebecca, and we married, and started a family, and came back to Kentucky, and I decided to run for political office, and my drinking came up during the race, and I just, you know, my opponent said of me, he said, my opponent is an alcoholic and a drug addict and comes from a dysfunctional family. And I said, you got me. It's check, check, check. You know, it's, you know, but I've been sober. I've released a statement. I've been sober for 10 years, and I wear that as a badge of honor. And I'm more proud of that than anything else in my life, and I'm not going to talk about it anymore. And I want, is Mark Ebert here, by the way? I saw him on the list. There he is, Mark. All right. I love Mark Ebert. And I remember you told me once that you tried to find some people to talk about my drug use, but they would just say, no, he's a nice guy, and wouldn't say much. And so if you're out there and you're using and considering a career in politics, it still pays to be nice to people. And, you know, pay your dealer, even tip. Everybody wants tips these days. And I remember Mark was about 3 months in, President Clinton came to town, and I got to go out on the tarmac and meet him. And I don't remember what I said, but I said something that made him laugh. And as I walked in, Mark said, "What'd you say that made him laugh?" And I said, "I did inhale." But please don't print that. Yeah. And so, you know, we started a family and we go on, and with that, you know, it's not just usually the alcohol or the drugs. You can get into other things. I got into gambling, and I needed to get help from that. And we have to be careful not to fall into other addictions. And I've been 23 years clean from that now. And I was about a year clean, and I was home, and Rebecca and I were having an argument about something silly, and I'm kind of a pouter, so I got out of, I went down to the den, and she followed me down because she hadn't finished her thought, and she started, and I just said, "Wait a minute." And she said, "What?" I said, "Do you know how lucky you are to be married to me?" And she said, "What?" And I said, "I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I don't gamble, I don't even cuss that much," which I don't know why I threw in that last one, but I did. And she looked at me and said, "I don't do any of those things either, but you're still an asshole." And I'm pretty good with comebacks, but I said, "Well, for me, that's a lot." And that was the best answer I had. But it also was one of those aha moments of, you got to do more. The quitting drinking, that's just table stakes. What kind of person are you going to be? What kind of husband are you going to be? What kind of father are you going to be? What kind of friend are you going to be? And I remember not long after that, we were at Disney when our kids were young, and our daughter was we were at dinner, and our daughter was telling us a story about something happened at school, and I interrupted, and I said, "Oh, that reminds me of a story about when I was your age, and this happened," and she said, "You're amazing." She said, "Why don't we just get a basket, and we can each write down something amazing about you, and put it in the basket, and then, you know, we can pass it around the table." And I was thinking, that doesn't sound like a bad idea, you know. But when she would call me Needy John, my little girl, an endearing nickname, Needy John. What is Needy? And I thought, my God, is it that obvious, you know? And why don't you listen? Why don't you listen instead of making it about you? And that's why I stay active. And outside help has been wonderful too, because I wanted to be a better person. And I'm grateful today. I've got a great relationship with my daughter, my son, and my wife, my mom, and friends too, and real friends. And I've learned to be a good friend. And I did the work. And I went back over 20 years sober, and I really tried hard to do the work, and I had some amends to make. And I was watching a movie late one night about a family that lost a child, and I thought, man, I hate it when the name Bruce comes up, and I just get a chill, and I want to deal with that. So I wrote the Feldman family, that was their name, they lived in Colorado now, a letter. I said, "I just want to tell you, I'm so sorry I didn't reach out to you all those years ago. I loved your son. He was an inspiration to me. I think of him often, and his his memory is alive and well all the way here in Louisville, Kentucky, and I sent it. And not long after, a letter came back, and I'm so grateful to hear from you. Thank you for your heartfelt letter. We're having a memorial for Bruce's 25th anniversary of his death, and we want you to come join us next Saturday. And it was one of those things that I thought, oh my God, I can't, but how can I not? And so I got on a plane and I flew out to Colorado, and I got a cab and went to their house, and it was a great big door, and this little woman answered and hugged me. And and the father gave me a tour of the house and was showing me pictures of Bruce, and he started crying. He said, "We're so glad you're here." And I hugged him, and they had 7 of his best friends from childhood there, and we just had an amazing night, and we talked and laughed and joked, and 3 in the morning, and I finally went back to my room, and I left the next morning at 8, and then we were out in Colorado a few years ago with my daughter, who gave me a Christmas present of a vacation with her any place I wanted to go, as long as she approved, and we went to Colorado, and we saw him again and had a wonderful, wonderful time together. And I'm at peace with that now, you know. And that book selling company, I went down, my boss died, and I made amends to him, and we were good, and he forgave me, and the funeral was in Tennessee, and I went down and saw a lot of people there, and they were wondering why I was there. But I stayed, and I said what I needed to say to them, and it was getting late, and I had to slip out, and it was a nice service. They're very evangelical, and it was but they're good people, and I left early, and then I walked back, and I looked in the window, and I looked at all of them, and I said, these are good people. They're good people. They're just not my people. I know where my people are. They're back home at the AA meetings. They get me, and I'm glad I found my people. And I'll close with this. I recently got accepted. I'm not sure why I did this, but I just enrolled at the University of Chicago for a master's in liberal arts, but I had to do an interview first, and it was a 30-minute interview, and there were 3 people, and they had their degrees from Yale and Columbia and all these, you know. I don't think there were any Bellarmine grads on there, so I was a little intimidated, and things were going very well, and we were at the 27th minute, and I think I'm telling myself this is going well. And then the last question is, you mentioned in your application Socrates and Plato, and who are some of the other thinkers and writers that influenced you and your personality? And I thought, you know, I did put in Socrates and Plato, but I didn't really mean that. I was just trying to impress you all, and I was kind of drawing a blank, and I'm like, what am I going to say? And then I thought, you could talk about recovery. Don't do that. Don't, you know. And then it just started because the law was too long. And I said, honestly, the people who have influenced me the most are very ordinary people. I've been in recovery for 39 years, and the people who have shaped me more are people I've met in AA meetings over the years who've given me simple advice, practical advice, that saved my life and helped make me a better person. And not people you would have heard of. People with names like Fishman and Mike Crawford and maybe what they said that someone else had written or said before, but they lived it and they cared about me. And what I learned from them is it's great to sound eloquent, but it's more important to show up for people and care. And that's my answer. And so they looked at each other and said, okay, you're in. And I was looking this morning after the meeting for a member's eye view it's a pamphlet AA puts out, a member's eye view of AA and recovery. And I couldn't find it, but I did find it online and I printed it off. And it was just a gentleman who was 16 years of sobriety, and he was describing to a group what recovery is. And I think he captures it beautifully. And I'll read a couple of paragraphs. He says, "Ladies and gentlemen, who would dare attempt to analyze a phenomenon, diagram a wonder, or parse a miracle? The answer is only a fool. And I trust that tonight I have not been such a fool. All I have tried to do is tell you where I have been the past 16 years and some of the things I have come to believe because of my journeyings. More than 16 years ago, 4 men, my boss, my physician, my pastor, and the one friend I had left, working singly and together, maneuvered me into AA. Tonight, if they were to ask me, 'Tell us, what did you find?' I would say to them what I say to you now. I can tell you only what I have heard and seen. It seems the blind do see, the lame do walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead rise, and over again, in the middle of the longest day or the darkest night, the poor in spirit have the good news told to them. God grant that it may always be so. And you all make that possible. To those who need this message, I am one of them. I'm grateful to you, and I'm grateful to all of the board members and all you do. You are truly doing God. We're saving lives, and you're saving good people. We're not bad people trying to get good. I mean, we're not, bad people trying to get good. We're sick people trying to get well, and you make that possible. And nothing more that I can think of. Nothing matters more than that. So thank you. God bless.